Well, let's have a question or two before we go have some more wine, which Jesus would have approved of. Anybody have a question, thought for me? Yes, please.
I was just wondering what you said about the intersection of the timeless of time.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the most important things is that he says, in four quartets, is in my end is my beginning.
Mm-hmm.
In my beginning is my end.
Yeah.
So it's a circularity.
Absolutely. I think that's, I think it's the circularity that interested him.
I think also that basically he was a critic foremost as well as a poet, in the sense that after four quartets he said he would never write another poem because it being too expensive for him to write poetry.
Well, it probably exhausted him.
Well, yes.
Yes. But I think, if I wrote the four quartets, I'd kind of retire. I think I'd say, been there, done, no need. I think it is really his last word. I think it's his greatest work by far. Yes. By far. Nothing compares.
And Wasteland was sort of a breakdown. It was like
Yeah.
a whole society.
It was kind of it means amazing, phrases and work in there, but it's kind of a breakdown. But then certainly in the four quartets, he pulls it together.
Exactly. All the bits, I think, are put into one poem.
Yeah, it's amazing how he integrated his entire philosophy.
Yeah. And I think the line was the fire and the rose.
Fire and the rose are one.
Exactly.
It's beautiful at the end of Little Gidding.
Wonderful, the end of life at the beginning of life.
I had a student the other day, a Muslim in my class. I said this poem combines, obviously Christian thinking with a bit of Buddhism and Hinduism. And he raised his hand. He said, there's a line here straight from the Quran. And I thought, whoa, I missed that one. But Eliot's, always there before you. That's another question. Yes, please.
Do you think he could have found spiritual satisfaction in any other traditions which perhaps he had considered following?
Well, if you read his book on the idea of a Christian society, I think he so believed in being where you are. And if you're living in England, and if you're living within a Christian tradition, and you want to live within a community, that I think he had a profound belief in Christianity as being the absolute way to go. So I have a hard time imagining that Eliot could have been happy, say, as a Buddhist. Maybe if he were living in Vietnam, that would have been the route he would have taken.
So you wouldn't say that he was a believer in the tradition of the place that one found oneself living in. You think he was, rather than that, he was an actual Christian who thought that was the objectively more valid tradition?
I think he would have thought that, I don't know what he really thought, but I think he would have thought that being in the place somehow informed his religious possibilities, and that he was going to have a much better chance of practicing discipline, the discipline of religion within the Christian tradition if you're in a Christian culture. I think he would have thought that, yeah.
What do you think he would have thought of established religiosity like the church being Britain?
Well, I think the religiosity would have troubled him, that word. I think that he believed in established religion. He kind of did like the idea, as you know, of an established religion. He liked the fact that England had an established religion. But I think, if you read Four Quartets, here's a man who is really open to all the possibilities of the Spirit and is not going to be, could never stand religiosity. I mean, he was a genuine practitioner. And I think in the practice, he found his deepening faith. But I think he would not have been judgmental about anyone else finding faith in some other vein. That's my guess. Yes, sir.
It seems to me that prayer is a very paradoxical kind of term in our culture. On one hand, it suggests an activity that you do in a formal religious setting, or at least in a religious setting.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't think after that, but then on the other, it is said that he doesn't have a prayer, which is to say that of course he would have a prayer, that's what he would wish to do, or you might say that there are no atheists in the trenches. I think that's probably because people in the trenches are, as it were, driven to pray.
I would think so.
Some kind of, it's a very intuitive thing to do in desperate circumstances. So that maybe, I'm just wondering if you could just talk about that. paradoxicality.
Well, it's paradoxical. I think there are really at least two kinds of prayer. Obviously, there's private prayer. And even within that, I think there's prayer as petition to make a bid, right, bidden to God, the German word for it, and right, or as a bid for something. But I think it's kind of ridiculous to say, you know, give me a nice house. But I think that there's a prayer for help me to cope with the circumstances and to adjust my feelings to the circumstances that I'm presented with. Help me to get through this. That seems a legitimate form of asking God for some help. But then there's also prayer as listening, which I think is the most underrated form of prayer. And I think to be still and to listen for the voice of God is probably the most profound kind of personal prayer. Then we have public prayer, where we are communally all saying, you know, together becoming a body of people who are, I think there's something in that ritual and liturgy, which Eliot understood was extremely important. So prayer has many different aspects, yeah.
Do you think he thought of prayer as being a verbal process? Because it strikes me that most of the images on which he draws, the spiritual person, are actually non-verbal. There's dancing, there's music, there's art, there's nature.
Yeah.
Most of the passages have to do with language.
Yeah.
And struggle and stress and strain, and the impossibility of expressing through words the reality that is there.
Yeah, I think that Eliot understood that language is difficult, and it's very hard to access divine reality through words. Possibly art is a better way of getting toward divine reality. Maybe dance is the purest form. Perhaps music.
Yes, does the music reach into the silence?
It does. Words after, you know, silence reach into the heart of the matter, right? So, yeah. Yes, please.
Looking at your Eliot's 5 things, prayer, observance, thought, and action, is the reason why the Western world is such a mess is because our action hasn't got these 4 things before it?
I would say 100%. Of course, that's, I would say, a minority view. But I would think that we live in a very chaotic world, right? In America, we're confronted with this guy, Donald Trump, who, you know, he was on some program being interviewed. I was watching it a few weeks ago about his religious views. And he said, I love my favorite book next to The Art of the Deal, which he wrote, is the Bible. And he said, you know, I'm right up there with God. I'm really in that ballpark. You know, I know what it's all about. And the man said, well, Mr. Trump, have you ever been contrite before God and confessed your own sins? He said, I don't do that sort of thing. He said, I have no need for confession. He said that. You know, so it's the most astonishing thing. And I think he is the embodiment of what you get, this chaotic, materialistic world we live in, where, you know, there's no thought. Certainly, there's no discipline. There's no discipline. I mean, you're not getting prayer. You're not, in most people, you're not getting prayer. You're not getting observance. You're not getting discipline. You're not getting thought. And so action, I think you're perfectly right. Where do you go with action? If you haven't had the 4 other things, you need it all to get right action. Otherwise, why would you be propelled toward right action? Really thinking first about your neighbor rather than yourself. To go beyond self-interest, right? You know, it's too much economics has been based on. I mean, Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations says self-interest is where it all starts. And I think, no, he had it wrong. I think, you know, if you've been properly practicing a religious faith, you realize that, you know, it doesn't begin with self-interest. It begins with interest in the other. That's where it really begins. So it's the opposite of that. Yes?
Something about the way you describe reading with your students,
Mm-hmm.
the way encounter with the poem is an individual matter, where
Mm-hmm.
each have their own interpretation,
Mm-hmm.
but it also is a communal, or can be an active
Yes.
sort of communion where people are arriving at understanding.
Well, that's where poetry functions like Scripture, right? I mean, how is Scripture used, right? What was Jesus' first act, public act, was to go up and stand in the synagogue, the ecclesia, in a gathering in Nazareth, and read from the book of Isaiah, right? And this is a communal act of reading. I mean, that's one of the first things Jesus does, is read poetry with other people. And you know, people probably knew the words very well. And so I think, you know, that's one of the functions of poetry, is to read together. Yeah, reading together, seeing together. Yes?
Seems to be that one of the strongest features of the Anglo-Catholic tradition is sacramental practice and the importance of sacramental life.
Yes.
Could you say a little bit about how you see that fitting into these five?
Well, I think it's that. I think when you talk about observance, I think that's part of having and discipline go together. Observance and discipline, and I think the sacramental life, the Eucharistic moment, is huge because it's the moment of access to the divine. So I think that, and also group practice, and becoming the one body, right? I think it's incredibly symbolic, but it's real in every way. It's both symbol and reality. So I think, you know, the sharing of the bread and the wine, becoming one body, is crucial. Yeah.
Would you link that with?
I'd link it with
the moment of the intersection of the timeless with time.
Yeah, I think this is one place where you're going to get the intersection of the timeless with time, is in the Eucharistic meal. Absolutely. And I think, if you know, how else do you get that? Otherwise, it's just distractions, moments of in the garden, in the smoke fall, right? The moment in the arbor where the rain beat, the moment in the drafty church at smoke fall, right? So at least with the discipline of a regular liturgy, you are getting the Eucharistic meal, and you're having a point of the intersection of the timeless with time. Well, yes?
It may be too late in a whole other paper, but I ask you about all the moments of death in the four quartets, and what do you think he's trying to say about death?
Well, I think he's thinking, especially in each part 4 of each quartet, is a kind of meditation on death. And I also think he's thinking about, I mean, it gives us the other epigraph to the 4 quartets, which is that the way up and the way down are the same. And so one of the ways to eternity is through the negative way, the via negativa, and through the way of dislocation, the way of disaffection. And I think Eliot would see death as the door to life. I mean, I think he's understanding that paradox. It's only through death is a great accession of life. In my end, as you were saying, is my beginning. So Eliot is aware of, is working with, and with suffering. Eliot is suggesting in each of the 4th sections of the quartets that suffering is useful, has its purpose. I mean, I think anyone knows that, in fact, faith always intensifies, religious practice intensifies in moments of extreme anxiety, difficulty, awareness of mortality, and painful things. I mean, and I think I personally believe in my own life I've only made spiritual progress in times of extreme stress. Fortunately or unfortunately, we all are given these things every day of our lives, practically. Some of us we're all given moments of extreme stress. Extreme stress. I mean, I don't think anybody gets out. I mean, if you've read the fine print in the contract, there's going to be an awful lot of that. So I consider all these moments of extreme stress, while horrible, are moments when we really can make spiritual progress. So I think Eliot is suggesting as much. Well, one more question.
I ask you whether that would have actually meant something to Christopher Hitchens.
Well, he was...
Because at some point he realized he was dying. I was thinking about you debating Christopher Hitchens, whether there was any point at which you either did feel that Eliot could be useful in making your argument, or whether afterwards or even now. Because there's quite a lot that you've been talking about and others have been talking about too, where I felt that there was, both at an intellectual and at a human level, an interface with the way that Hitchens...
It's funny, I sat with Hitchens in the sort of back of the theater afterward. He seemed very human, very vulnerable, and he said, you know, I will be dead in about a year. And he was and I thought in that vulnerability, he probably came closest to faith in something, you know? Interestingly enough, I think I could see his heart did not seem in arguing against God. And I felt almost like, this is ridiculous. This is not a fair fight. You know?
He had time.
What's that?
He had time.
Well, he was, he had cancer and he was going to be, so
He had time to think.
he had time to think.
Which is better than being at a car smash when you don't have time to think about it.
That's true. So maybe he had some deep thoughts toward the end. Well, listen, thank you for your attention.